The latest rate cut from the RBA is about to make this existing problem with the Australian property market even worse. And if you don't play this right, it could cause you a lot of financial pain. That's why today I'm going to talk about what the latest rate cut is actually doing to the property market, why the situation is about to get worse even if the RBA does not give us another rate cut in 2025, and I personally think they will, and number 3, how you could take maximum advantage of this situation as it unfolds. Let's begin by looking at this particular property, a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house, 33 Monica Avenue, Hassel Grove in New South Wales. It sold at auction for $1,015,000. But as high as that might seem, that's not the most interesting part. The property ended up selling for a suburb record. When the sales agent was asked what he thought it might go for, he said his gut feel was $940,000 to $950,000. So this property sold for much higher than the sales agent said he expected. But why was it so surprising? It's because in that first week, now this property was on the market for only 3 weeks, in the first week alone, there were 35 groups through this particular property. And we're seeing this happen in multiple areas around the country. For example, a property we looked at in Brisbane, there were 48 groups through that particular property just this last weekend gone. In Melbourne, we looked at a property for a client. There were over 93 groups through that particular property. Another property we looked at in regional Queensland, there weren't just 21 groups through the property, there was more than that. There were 21 offers made on that particular property. Now, spoiler alert, we were able to get that particular property for our clients for less than the highest offer because of the way we negotiate and our relationship with some of these local agents. But I digress. The question I ask is, why is this happening? Why are there in certain key areas so many more buyers than available properties for sale? Because if you have a property where there's 20, 30, even 90 groups through that particular property, odds are there are not enough properties available for the number of people who want to buy property and the number of people who can afford prices at their current levels. So why is this happening? These next charts tell the story. Here we have data from SQM Research showing the total property listings on a national basis. Now, what you can see is that from roughly 2012 to about 2020, it was roughly flat. Similar number of properties for sale on average every year. But then look what happened from 2020. There was a sharp drop-off until sort of 2022, and then there was a bit of an increase. Now, that increase was why? Primarily because of higher interest rate. Now, even though the number of properties for sale did rise from their low in 2022, and the media made a big deal about, oh, look how many properties are for sale compared to what happened in 2022, as you can see from the chart, the number of properties for sale is still a lot less than the long-term averages that we were seeing back in between 2011 and say 2020. Now, look at what's been happening since the second half of 2024. The number of properties for sale has been actually falling once again. That means that supply is actually falling, and yet when we look at migration levels, yes, they are lower than they were in those record couple of years after the pandemic. But if we look at what projected migration levels are in Australia, they're about 3 times the level of our long-term average before the pandemic. So we certainly are going to have more and more people coming into this country needing and wanting property to live, and yet the number of properties for sale is actually falling away on a national basis. And if we start looking at this on a city by city basis, we start to see an even more interesting picture. Here we have Adelaide, a market that has grown so much and so many investors think, oh, it's never going to grow. It reached its peak, and people were telling me this in 2023, in 2024, and yet prices in Adelaide have continued to rise at some of the fastest rate in the country. And one of the big reasons is this particular chart. We can see here that from essentially 2020, the number of properties for sale, the supply of existing properties in this particular market has been falling away. It fell away quite steeply from 2020 to 2022, but then even after 2022, the number of existing properties for sale has continued its downwards trend, although not so steeply. Then if we look at the Brisbane property market, we can see something very, very similar. The number of existing properties for sale reduced quite significantly from 2020 until 2022. Then there was a bit of an increase, and again many people said at that time, oh, that means the Brisbane property boom is over. But then look what happened as we got towards 2023. Properties for sale then continued their downwards trend. So what this means again is that supply of existing properties is actually less than it was a few years ago, yet our population growth today is much higher than it was a few years ago. And if you'd like to know more about how to find these areas that are going to have the biggest gaps between demand and supply, the biggest potential for capital growth, check out the link in the description below to get totally for free the audio version and digital version of my book. It's a full property investing blueprint based on my now 23 years of investment experience. Then when we look at the number of properties being built right now, yes, we can see from this latest data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, there was a slight uptick in last month, but look at where we are in terms of the number of properties being built today compared to say where we were building at our peak back in 2017. We were building so many more homes back in 2017 at our peak than we are right now. Yet back in 2017, our population was nowhere near as high as it is today, and it wasn't growing as fast either. So what does that show you? Well, it shows you that while property in Australia is expensive, and while unfortunately many people may not be able to afford property at their current prices, it does not mean prices are going to fall. In fact, with demand for property, demand from people who both want and can afford property at their current levels versus the number of properties available for sale, both existing properties and even new builds, that gap is so large. And while that gap continues to remain that large and probably even get even larger, and I'll share with you why in just a moment, then fundamental economics will tell you that prices will continue to rise. That's why home values are on track to be potentially 8 times the average Australian income. The wealth divide between people who own a home and those who do not is likely to reach record levels next year, 2026, as property values keep rising faster than household incomes and owners benefit from further interest rate cuts. Industry analysts and major banks expect home prices to increase by as much as 13% by the end of 2026, and there could be as many as 4 cash rate cuts by May. Now, since this article was produced, we've had 1 rate cut, so that means that major banks are expecting another 3 rate cuts. But we're talking about a 13% increase in property prices. Now, to keep the numbers easy, let's say we look at a property for a price of $1 million. That means that if this article is right, and the data certainly seems to support it, not everywhere, but in certain key areas, what that means is that a $1 million property today could be worth $1,130,000, or an increase of $130,000 between now and the end of 2026. That's very likely to happen in multiple areas around Australia because demand is so much higher than supply. But that gap is about to get even bigger from January 1. And that's a big reason why so many first home buyers and investors are looking to buy property before Christmas, because on the 1st of January, the federal government is introducing its new updated first home buyer incentive scheme. That means that many first home buyers, regardless of their incomes, could buy a home for just a 5% deposit and no lender's mortgage insurance. Now, let's say we're looking at a property for $600,000 in a particular regional market. A 5% deposit is $30,000. That's all they need as a couple potentially to be able to buy that property. We can exclude stamp duty because that's going to vary from state to state, because certain state governments are even giving stamp duty concessions. So it's going to become almost a feeding frenzy from the start of next year, as we have so many more people who perhaps can't afford property today because they don't have the deposit. They will be able to from the 1st of January. So you're going to have even more demand coming onto the market at a time when supply is at all-time lows. What do you think is likely to happen to property prices? That's why the prediction is that house prices could reach 8 times the average Australian income. And what that means for so many people is that if you can afford to buy an investment property and you choose not to, the odds are in 12 months' time, you'll be looking back with regret, wishing you had bought and probably being further behind on your financial goals than you were hoping to be. Now, of course, that does not mean though that you can go buy blindly. Different areas are going to perform differently. So if you'd like help to work out, well, where are the best places for you to invest so you can take maximum advantage of this significant property uplift that's coming, check out the link in the description below to book totally for free a no obligation call with a member of our team where we can show you where the best areas are for you to invest based on your budget. How do we build a plan to help you get to your financial goals and ultimately help you avoid a painful mistake? Now that you know the implications of this latest RBA rate cut, you know that prices are going to rise in multiple areas. That's though not enough if you're serious about building wealth. You need to actually have a strategy in place in order to help you get from where you are to where you want to get to using property as the investment vehicle. So if you'd like to know more about how you can build a plan to help you invest in property, check out this next video where I walk you through the key data points you need to consider when looking at property, the right strategy for you, and how to avoid some of the most common mistakes I'm seeing so many first-time investors make.